on the second half of the American Gothic couple. Would it be the better half or the... Watch my...
Yeah, don't get me in trouble.
Let's put our hands together for Henry Yeager.
Hello, everyone. This is a true story that happened to my sisters and I and my mother when she was a little girl. And I've always believed that there's somebody, spirit, that takes care of us. After they have passed, they have somebody, they are assigned somebody to take care of. I know I have one that he's getting pretty tired of my crap. So, but anyway, this is some stories in relationship to that. It's called Scatter Creek. It was a hot summer day on my grandmother's farm in Arkansas. The leaves from the chinaberry tree hung heavy in the breezeless summer air, and the farm animals were all searching for whatever shade they could find. My grandmother and mother had gone to visit some neighbors, but my two sisters and I had decided to stay at home. It was just too hot to ride in that old car. After they left, we were trying to figure out what we were going to do to entertain ourselves. We had made a pirate ship out of a fallen tree in the woods and spent a lot of time playing on it, and also had a grapevine that we had made into a swing. But again, it was too hot to even do that. Then my oldest sister, Nancy, said, "Let's go swimming." Now, there was a creek going through my grandmother's farm called Scatter Creek, and we would sometimes go down there to cool off. It was not very deep, but it was spring-fed, and the water was cool and clear. However, there was one part of the creek that was deep enough to swim in. There was a sharp bend in the creek, and over the years it had eroded the bottom, and there was a pool that was about 20 feet across and 5 or 6 foot deep in the middle, well above our heads. Grandma had told us we never should go there without a grown-up, but Grandma was gone, and it was awfully hot. We could go swimming and get back before my mother and Grandma returned from their trip. So it was decided we would go. We all put our swimsuits on and with towels in hand started down the dusty road. We'd only gone a short distance when our feet told us to go home and put some shoes on. The gravel and the dust in the road were so hot we could hardly walk. It was like walking on fire. Besides, we were city kids and still had our city feet. No country feet yet, just pain. So we all limped home and put our shoes on. Our feet were quite happy. As we got closer to the swimming hole, we left the road and cut through a wooded area. We then climbed down a steep bank to Scatter Creek. The pool was in a very isolated area, but I think that over the years other people had been swimming there also. On either side of the swimming hole, the water was only ankle deep. We hung our towels on the branches of an old dead tree and began splashing in the water. The cool water felt good as it washed away the sweat and the dust. Now, my oldest sister Nancy could swim a little bit and said that she could swim all the way across the deep part. Before we could talk her out of it, she dove in, and with legs kicking and arms splashing, she started across it. "I told you I could do it," she says, as she crawled out on the other side, still gasping for air. Now, there was a little bit of rivalry between my sisters, and my youngest sister, Nerlee, said that if Nancy can do it, she could do it too. She jumped in and started across. She soon found out that she'd made a terrible mistake. About halfway across, she could go no farther. She just slipped under the water and disappeared. A few seconds later, her head popped up and out of the water, and she screamed before she again disappeared. Now, I too could swim a little bit and thought that I could save her. I dove in and swam out to her. As I got close to her, she grabbed hold of me and tried to pull herself out of the water. I could not hold her up, and now I went under. When my feet hit the muddy bottom, I pushed myself to the surface, grabbed a breath of air before again going to the bottom. All the time, my sister was hanging on to me. We were now both drowning. The next thing I remember was lying on the bank. I coughed and sputtered as I slowly gained my breath. I opened my eyes and saw my sister lying next to me. She was also coughing up the dark water of Scatter Creek. My senses slowly came back to me, and I began to remember what had happened. I then saw two people standing next to my sister and I. It was a man and a woman in their late 20s or early 30s. It's hard to remember that far back, but there did not appear to be anything unusual about them except that their clothing was not wet. I am sure of that. I turned my head to look at my sister, and when I looked back at them, they were gone. They never spoke a word. They were there one moment, pulled us out of the water, and then were gone. I have asked both of my sisters what they remember about that day, and my younger sister, who almost drowned, remembers the same thing I did. After swimming across, my older sister had walked down the bank to the shallow area, crossed over, and was heading back to where she had originally jumped in and to where my sister and I were now lying. She said that she had not seen anything and did not even know that we'd almost drowned. I sometimes think back about what happened on that day so many years ago and wonder who those people were that saved my sister and I. The swimming hole was well off the beaten path and not very many people knew of it. The coincidence of someone showing up at the very instant we were drowning is hard to believe. Their clothes were not wet and they did not say a word. We never did say anything to our grandmother or mother about what had happened, as we were scared we might get in trouble. We were just happy to be alive. Years later, my mother told me a story about something that had happened to her when she was a little girl. The incident happened real close to where the swimming hole was. She never told anyone what had happened to her and only told me when she was well into her 90s. She was around 8 years old and was going from her house to visit her cousin Ed and Effie Hooker, who lived about a quarter of a mile away. It was late afternoon on a warm summer day. She was coming down a small hill, not paying much attention to anything except to where she was walking. She then felt that someone was watching her. She looked up and saw a man standing on the side of the road. He was leaning against a tree and was holding the reins of a horse that was standing next to him. He was holding a long rifle and was wearing what appeared to be a uniform. When she glanced at him, he smiled and tipped his hat. As she was startled to see someone on this lonely country road, she looked down and continued walking. A few steps later, curiosity overtook her, and she turned to look back at him. He was gone. No sounds, no words. He just disappeared. Just a short distance away, behind Ed Hooker's house, where my mother was going, is a small family cemetery. All people that are buried there are family members or relatives except one. He is listed as being in the 9th Indiana Regiment. Is this a person my mother saw as a child? Also, stories passed down to me by my family tell me that my grandfather's first wife, Hannah Reynolds Hooker, drowned in a canoe accident on the White River in Indiana several years before. Cannons were fired across the river, but the body was never found. She was only 21 years old. Was she involved with saving my sister and I, giving us a longer life than she had had? I have had many close calls in my life where I could have been killed or at least severely injured. There was always someone there to protect me. Years have passed, and my cousin's house, where my mother was going to on that summer day, is gone, but the house that my mother grew up in still stands. She has lost some of her paint and needs some fixing up, but she is still an elegant lady. She is a Sears and Roebuck's house that was delivered by train to the town of Hooker. Hooker was named after my great-grandfather, J.W. Hooker, who started a sawmill there in the late 1800s. All the pre-cut lumber of the house was then delivered approximately a mile away to the building site by mule and wagon, where she was put together piece by piece. She sits on a large cedar log that my great-grandfather cut from the forest that he owned. The house was completed in 1908. She sits on a hill, majestically overlooking the countryside below. When the people speak of her now, they call her the Haunted Hooker House. There have been reports of lights on in the house when the house was vacant, and none of the people living there want to go into the attic or the root cellar. The old cemetery has all but disappeared as nature is trying to reclaim it. Only a few tombstones are still visible, but their spirits are still around us. They are the wind that blows through the pine trees and the smell of the apple blossoms in the spring. They are the sounds of the mockingbird that inhabits a tree near the old farmhouse. Scatter Creek still flows gently through the valley, resting a while at the old swimming hole before moving on. There is nothing to fear from these kind spirits that roam the hills around the old Hooker house. They are just protecting their own. So if they want to leave the lights on, wander the countryside, and visit the attic and root cellar, so be it. They were here first. Maybe after I leave this world, if I go that direction, I will join them, and it will be my job to protect someone. I hope so. So this is my story. You believe what you want. But as for me, I owe someone a beer, a cup of coffee, or at least a hug.
May be leaving for now. but the nightmares will return.